So a local councillor is in some ways just like a paid community organiser. So you have a lot of autonomy over how you spend your time and what projects you focus on. So I tend to put a lot of energy into organising around issues that I'm passionate. So things like anti-racism, housing affordability, ethical consumption and that sort of stuff. So I've always been quite interested in politics, and particularly like refugee rights and Aboriginal justice. I think the thing that finally pushed me to get involved in local politics though is actually gentrification. Living around West End, working as a musician and an events organiser, and suddenly rents start rising, the whole area's changing, everyone's getting priced out, and feeling that really sort of strongly and personally that my neighbourhood was transforming before my eyes and I had no control over it, and no one else had any control over it. We were all being screwed over by a few big developers who were profiting from the commodification of our neighbourhood. So that sort of prompted me to take more of an interest in local politics, and we realised that at the local level, if you do things right and organise effectively, you can actually win seats pretty easily. And we realised that that was a more effective pathway to change than trying to just win state and federal seats. I think really change does have to come from the bottom up, and you can use that local council to do a lot in the community, whether or not state and federal governments are even supportive. So it's more of an anarchist approach to politics rather than just trying to replicate hierarchical systems of power. I think like we can organise all our own sort of community networks and like community centres and community like farms and gardens and all that sort of stuff, but as soon as anything becomes too big a threat to established power structures and to corporate capitalism, the system tends to crack down on you pretty hard. So you do need to have like some level of structural power. You have to be able to use all that collective community energy to take control of existing power systems, whether that's council and governments and whatnot. But I think then the goal has to be to decentralise and tear down those power structures. I don't think it's enough to just say, oh, vote for us, elect us, we're the good guys, we'll be different. We need to recognise that hierarchical power systems are inherently corrupting, and that whoever gets in charge will over time be changed by that system. So the goal really is not only to develop the sort of community services and like community support networks, but also community decision making, so that we can make democratic decisions collectively within our own communities. And that can then become kind of a replacement for hierarchical representative government. We want participatory direct democracy rather than like representative democracy where you just vote once every 3 years and cross your fingers and listen. I think I first started questioning and thinking about meat consumption as an unethical issue because my younger sister became vegetarian back as a teenager, and it took me a few years to follow suit. But like, I think it is personal relationships. Like I'm in a community where a lot of people are vegetarian or vegan, and it's kind of almost now accepted that meat is murder, or that like factory farming is horrible and unethical, and everyone knows and can see that. And then the big question is, okay, what do we do about it? How do we affect change? And I think, what I'm realising is that it does come down to personal relationships. And I think sometimes like vegetarian and vegan movements try to convert strangers, which is actually a really hard thing to do. It's much better to work within existing social networks, lead by example, and sort of gently lead your friends and family along the journey. And I was like, before we screened Dominion in the park, I showed about half an hour of it to my dad, who's been a lifelong meat eater, late 60s. I never expected him to switch to vegetarian, but he actually watched that movie and has now given up meat. And it's like huge change. But I think it was because we did it in a way that wasn't preachy, wasn't moralizing, didn't make it like guilt trip him. It was just like, look, here are the facts, you decide for yourself. And he made the right decision. And I think, I get frustrated sometimes when vegans get really preachy and judgy and are like, oh, you're being unethical.
That's a superiority.
And that kind of moralizing sucks, particularly when you recognize that none of us are leading an ethically pure life. And even, the most ethically produced vegan products probably still got transported using fossil fuels, which meant that somewhere along the line there's been a corruption of the system, right? Like, so I don't think any one of us can pretend that we are 100% ethical in the lives we lead. And so it's really dangerous to start taking a holier than thou attitude. It just puts people off. Like, brought in a fairly strict rule of only vegetarian and vegan barbecues at our community events and stuff, and a few people were like, oh, you're ramming it down our throats, you're pushing your agenda onto us. And I was like, well, look, it's a free barbecue, you can take it or leave it. But Yeah, just made a very clear ethical call that I didn't want to be serving meat or using my office budget to buy meat. We got a bit of pushback, but interestingly, there was also pushback from like sort of progressive people who were like, oh, if you want to bring people with you, if you want to engage people, you have to meet them where they're at. And there was sort of this concern that, oh, if you only serve vegetarian sausages, then only vegetarians are going to turn up and you'll be preaching to the converted. But actually, that's not what's happened. Like, people still rock up because it's a free meal. And I think it's provoked some really good conversations, because what it does is normalize vegetarianism. I'm not just another activist out there. I'm actually their elected representative. Like, I'm on the city council, I won an election, I have this sort of legitimacy. And for me now to be saying, oh, we're only going to be serving vegan sausages at our barbecues for now on, that does sort of shift people's thinking, and they're like, oh, vegetarianism is normal, it's not fringe or extreme. Even the councillor's doing it, kind of thing. So it's a powerful way of, like, without preaching too much, without ramming stuff down people's throats, like, I just say it, I'm organising a vegetarian barbecue, and that helps, change values in the process, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
The focus of mine at the moment has been renters' rights and housing affordability, and that's because I see that as a fundamental issue. Like, the treatment of housing as a commodity is a fundamental element of our current economic and financial systems, but it's also the thing that makes people so precarious. We're all working long hours and stressing about making money because we need to pay for the cost of housing. And so if you liberate that for people from that, and people know that they're going to have a roof over their head and know they're going to have long-term stability in their home, then they do have more time for community gardens and activism and participatory democracy and all the good stuff that we always scratch our head being like, oh, we can't get enough people to turn up to this rally or can't get enough people to this event. It's because they're all busy trying to pay off a mortgage. So fix that problem first, and then a lot of the other stuff is easier. And that's the same whether, if we're talking about climate change or refugee rights, those big issues, people don't have the emotional energy to think about them until their immediate material concerns have been addressed. And particularly for a lot of young people, if you want to galvanise them and politicise them, they can't be worried about their rent or whether they're going to get evicted. So we've got to give them that stability. And on the basis of that stability of housing, we can then build resilient community networks that have more time and capacity for activism.